Explore the vibrant arts and culture landscape of Michigan, a state with a thriving creative ecosystem that has birthed iconic movements like Motown and the Purple Rose Theater. Home to legendary musicians, writers, and artists, Michigan boasts a rich tapestry of cultural heritage known worldwide. Michigan Creates is a podcast series that will connect listeners with gifted artists and cultural institutions that are nurturing Michigan's vibrant creative landscape. I'm Ara Topouzian, host of Michigan Creates, and on today's episode, I have the opportunity to speak to Marsha Music. Marsha is all things Detroit. She is a wealth of information. She has got some great knowledge of the history of Detroit, and we're going to talk to her about that. We're going to talk about her writing and her speaking abilities. She's just a wonderful person overall to talk to, and she's made such an impact in the arts community in Detroit, Michigan. So join me as I talk to Marsha Music on Michigan Creates. Marsha Music, an old friend, young person, old friend. We've known each other for a very long time, so it is a pleasure to talk to you today. There's certainly a lot to talk about. So good seeing you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. After COVID and such, we don't see each other as much at
No,
events and things any longer. But I think that you and I were in the same class
we
of
were.
the Kresge Arts Awards
Yeah,
back in 2012.
yeah.
And, you've had a career trajectory since then of your wonderful music
Oh,
and
thank you.
cultural work. And so I'm very honored to be here with you.
Well, thank you, Marsha. I've talked to others that are sort of in our class, if you will, and I think we all sort of agree that that was a real special group.
Mhm, mhm.
And it was over 10 years ago.
Yep.
And I think everybody did very well. I think we all sort of moved on to a lot of different things. And we're going to get to that with you. I want to definitely talk about how the Kresge Arts Fellowship really changed, what you were doing in your path. But let's first talk about who Marsha is. So you've got a very rich background. So tell me about that. If tell our viewers, who is Marsha Music?
Well, I am Marsha Music, and my real name, my legal name is Marsha Philpott.
Yep.
Marsha Battle Philpott. Battle is my maiden name. I came to call myself Marsha Music after years of writing about music.
Yep.
Uh, I began sort of my last iteration of writing back in the early 2000s.
Hmm.
And at that time, I had been writing all of my life since I was a child. I was always a writer.
What
And
kind of writing? What kind of writing were you doing as
well,
a child?
well, if I may, I'll go back to my upbringing. I grew up. My dad was a record producer
Yep.
and a record man, a record seller, and he had a record store on Hastings in Old Black Bottom, just outside of Old Black Bottom, and it was called Joe's Record Shop. And because of growing up in the record business, I spent a lot of time around music. And from his Hastings Street store, and then when the I-75 freeway came through
Mm.
Hastings and destroyed it, and in fact, his record store had to move, and it moved with a great part of the community to the 12th Street community
Okay.
on the west side, several miles away. And so that is where my real memories began as a little girl at the 12th Street store, starting about 1960, when I was about 6 years old. And so I spent a lot of time in the record store
Mhm.
and a lot of time around all kinds of music. And it really shaped me as far as my music consciousness.
Right.
And so I was always exposed to a lot of music and a lot of genres of music. And he 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 also would bring various uh, kinds of music and music from other countries,
Hmm.
uh,
Oh,
just to entertain us kids sometimes. You
right.
know, I remember in the early 60s when the Beatles were taking off.
Yeah.
And boy, did we kids love the Beatles. Oh my God, we just
Yeah.
love the Beatles. And I remember Dad, before they had gotten really, really big, I remember him bringing us, meaning me and my younger siblings, um, an album that had been produced in Germany, and
Okay.
it was all in German. When the Beatles were they were doing concerts in these nightclubs that were sort of caves in this area of Germany,
Hmm.
and these were done in German, and so I remember learning "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in German,
Oh, wow.
and it was called "Come Get Me Deine Hand."
Oh my gosh. So was it the Beatles actually singing in German or was
Yes,
it just, it
They were
was,
they were
wow.
they were singing in German, and the whole album was in German, and so that was a pretty unusual thing.
Yeah.
But I grew up in music. But my we grew up. I was born in Detroit,
Yep.
in what's called now Sugar Hill,
Hmm.
which is the area of around between Warren and Mack Avenue
Right.
and John R. and down the John R. Strip. And it was kind of an extension of the Paradise Valley neighborhood that was a little further south.
Sure.
And so my dad and my mother lived together on Hancock and John R. And he was in an entanglement with my mother because he
Okay.
had a wife at the time,
Oh,
and who he had was no longer with, but she wouldn't give him a divorce, and which
oh,
was really scandalous at the time.
yeah.
And so I was a product of that, as well as my brother, my younger brother,
Okay.
directly younger brother. And but they married before he was eventually granted a divorce,
Yeah.
and by the time my younger two siblings were there, they were married. But I never knew any of that literally until the last decade or more.
Right.
I
Oh,
never
wow.
I never knew that.
Oh, all
Uh,
these years you had no idea.
so I had no idea. Well,
Mhm.
number one, in the old days, there was such a thing as grown folks' business,
Yep.
and you weren't in it, and they
Not
didn't.
now. Now everybody's in
Not
everybody's business.
everybody's business.
Right.
In those days, adults kept their business to themselves.
Right.
At least not with the kids in it. The kids couldn't sit up under the adults and listen to them talk about stuff. They'd be like, "Go somewhere
Right.
and play." So I knew that my dad had a prior family. I knew
Yeah.
that because we were very much. They were very much a part of our life,
Hmm.
his prior children. Uh,
Okay.
but I was a kid, and so I didn't understand the machinations of all that.
Right.
And so I didn't know that I thought that my mom and dad, eventually he had a first wife and he got married and then he had us. But no, it was a little bit more twisted around than that. He had us and then they got married. And But we were very close to his first children,
Okay.
um, his first set of children, and we were very, very blessed that those children did not have animosity toward us.
Yeah.
They were very close to this second family of my dad's and
Right.
doted on us. And we spent the night, they were older than us. I guess you might say that my mom was my dad's trophy wife. You could put it that way. She
Okay. Yeah.
was very beautiful. And she had come to work in the record shop with him, and he was smitten by her. He was a lot older than her, and so his kids were older than us. And
Right.
but they doted on us, and as they got older and had families, we'd go spend the night at one of their homes, and they were sort of like aunts and uncles more so than older siblings.
That's
But
great. That's a
it was
rarity.
amazing. It was amazing because we could have grown up in some real toxic
Right.
situations. I'm not saying that their mother was happy with us. I'm not going to say that. I knew that there was this older lady that lived with my older sister. I didn't know who
Right.
she was, but there's this older lady and she doesn't seem to like me.
Well, there's
But
got to be somebody in the relationship that's not happy with it,
oh,
right?
of course
So,
not, of course. So, but anyway, yeah, no, she wasn't happy about it as is understood. And
sure.
but yeah, so we grew up in a certain amount of I guess you would say tumultuousness that was hidden from us
Right.
in that way. And we grew up. So I was born there, and my brother too on Hancock and John R. That's where our first home was. And then my dad bought my mother a home in Highland Park, and
Yep.
that's where I really call my growing up years. We're
Right.
in Highland Park. Hmm.
Right. And Highland Park, as you and I have talked offline, was really kind of a hodgepodge of ethnicity.
Uh-huh.
And they had some real gems in that
Yes.
neighborhood.
Well, Highland Park is such a special place
Yeah.
because it was literally, the sort of dream of melting pot life.
Yep.
Because there were so many nationalities of people that had come to Highland Park to live, mostly at the enticement of Henry Ford, the
Mm,
automaker,
right.
who opened his first assembly plant in Highland Park. And he basically shepherded the development of the entire city in
Yeah.
many of its built structures. And it's really, even today, stunning housing. Um,
Yes.
he sort of engineered the development of the community. He was sort of creating his own fiefdom.
Yeah.
And in Highland Park and the area surrounding that plant really became the home of some of the most significant collection of arts and crafts homes in the United States. One of the top collections.
Yeah.
And those homes are still in existence, and many of them are still very, very beautiful. And but because Henry Ford had put out this national call
Hmm.
to um, work for $5.
Right.
Wages were abysmally much lower than that generally. And he
Yeah.
made the call throughout the United States, come to Detroit or quote Highland Park and work for $5 a day, which was an astronomical sum to
Right.
many. That was
Right.
like for so many people, it was a
It was a
month.
gold mine.
It was like a month's
Yeah.
worth of.
Yeah.
So people came from not just all over the United States, but they came from many parts of the world to come
Mhm.
there and work. And one of the national groupings that came and made a home there were the Armenians.
Yeah.
And you, as an Armenian, and I have talked about this a lot, in that I grew up with um, um, this community of Armenians
Yep.
uh, who were just a part of Highland Park life. Now,
Oh, yeah.
we had no idea as children that they were coming, escaping
Right.
um,
Genocide.
pogroms. We didn't know this.
Right.
We just know that they were our friends, and
Right.
they were Armenian, and
Right.
but they were also among other national groups that were in
Hmm.
Highland Park at the time, and of course, the African Americans, our families who
Yep.
were coming up from the South, or
Right.
they had made the initial stop maybe in the Black Bottom community,
Right.
and then moved other places. And then finally, as segregation began to loosen somewhat, many of them ended up in Highland Park in the late 40s, early 50s. My family moved there in the mid 1950s.
Yeah. And to your point, Marsha, there were a ton of Armenians in Highland Park. We had family in the
Mhm.
Highland Park area. there were grocery stores, there were, you and I
Yes.
talked about Victor's Bakery, which,
Bakery,
oh, to
the
me was
iconic, the
iconic.
iconic Victor Bakery.
Yeah, they
Yes,
had made the best bread around, and I've
yes.
got memories of my dad dropping myself off to like Saturday school, Armenian school, and
Okay,
that was in Dearborn, and then he'd drive to Victor's Bakery and
okay.
buy 5 or 6 of these loaves, and they were warm and they were crispy. I mean, I could still taste it, and we're
Yeah,
talking lots of years.
yeah.
And we'd make a mess in the car because there'd be crumbs everywhere.
Right,
But you
right,
didn't
right.
put butter on it. You didn't eat anything on
Just
it.
ate the bread.
You just ate the bread. So I mean, to your point, I mean, Highland Park was definitely a special place,
Yes.
and you're right, of course, that Henry Ford was kind of a catalyst in bringing a lot of immigrants to
Mhm.
the area. I mean, I often talk about, when they say, well, why did the Armenians come to Detroit? Well, they came to Detroit because of Ford Motor Company,
Yeah,
because
correct.
of that $5 a day. Go ahead.
Well, and also Ford was very cunning in this.
Yeah,
He was creating this melting pot of nationalities, also in order to kind of keep labor from uniting,
right.
so that you would have all of these people in these various cultural groups that would kind of stay amongst their own and not unite with the ones across the assembly line that may be from somewhere else.
Yeah,
And then you have the blacks, relegated to some of the hardest and lesser paid even jobs. So,
right.
you have a lot of manipulation going on with the whole thing. But the result of a lot of it was that we grew up in this group of children in Highland Park.
Mhm.
Uh, and many of us can remember to this day of how we grew up with all of these different children from many places.
Yeah. And so where I'm leading with this, and you think about this, just a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about your dad's record shop, and we've kind of morphed into Highland Park. You're somewhat of an authority on Detroit in general, history. Um, at least I think you are. And I know I read somewhere I think you call yourself a Detroitist, which is an interesting term. Talk to me about your writing then. If you started with music because music was everywhere because of your father's record shop, how did that morph into different styles of writing? What were you writing? What did that move into, Marsha, as far as your writing?
Well, I can remember as a kid, I loved to write in Highland Park schools. I attended Highland Park schools, which were at that time amongst the top school systems in the United States. It was one of the top schools, and at one point, the top school in the state of Michigan.
Hmm.
And the reason for this was the massiveness of the tax base there. Much of it because of not just Henry Ford, but other industry that was there. And because after a while, you also had Chrysler headquarters there.
Right.
And now I grew up like 2 blocks away from that. You had the Excello Corporation. So you had
Hmm.
these major, massive
Yeah.
corporations. And so there was a lot of support for the school systems. And in fact, Henry Ford even had created these schools for immigrants, um, so that they might be assimilated into the culture better on the one hand and maintain their own cultural difference from others at
Right.
the same time.
Right.
But and there's some very interesting work on that has been done by one Jonathan Schwartz. You can Google his works on the Armenians in Highland Park.
Yep.
Very excellent work. And um, so as a small child, I was a voracious reader, and I loved to write. And I remember as a kid, maybe, I don't know, 7 or something years old, something like that, I remember winning a contest for my writing, for writing a poem called I Love Michigan. And
Okay.
and I don't have an idea of a word of that poem. But I remember my dad rewarding me for winning that contest, the I Love Michigan contest, and
Right.
um, he let me read the poem on his radio show. He
Oh,
had a radio show on CKLW,
okay.
which was a very popular uh, radio station that
Yep.
was based in Windsor, Canada.
Yep.
And they also allowed what we would say today is community access.
Right.
And he had a radio show that he paid for space, and it came on at about 11 o'clock at night. And he would play the music that it was a gospel show on Sunday nights, and he would play music that he produced, which
Hmm.
included music by the Reverend C.L. Franklin. And the Reverend Franklin at that point also had music on that radio. He also had a radio show.
Right.
C.L. Franklin, the father of Aretha Franklin.
Right.
And he had a radio show at 10 o'clock. So between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, you had these airwaves in the African American community where they listened to them, dominated by this music of the Reverend C.L. Franklin, which is one of the reasons he became very famous.
Yeah.
And my father in 1953 began to record Aretha, and he was the first to ever record her. So I was a child, years after that.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thought of when Aretha was recording, but I remember winning that contest, and I would write all through my school years, my elementary school years, because I was trying to express the really stellar kind of primary education that we received in Highland Park.
Okay.
And for example, we had swimming pools in our elementary schools, um, and kind of causing the stereotype that Black people don't swim. Well, in
Hmm.
Highland Park, Black people were swimmers
Okay.
because
Yeah.
of the predominance of swimming pools in all of our schools.
Right.
And so then I began to write as an adult, and as a teenager, I became a real activist after the '67 rebellion in Detroit.
Yep.
And that kind of shifted my writing to social issues
Yeah.
and social things, and rants about whatever issue was going on at the time. I would write, and I remember being published in the South End, the
Hmm.
Inner City Voice, these local papers of the time. And I was so excited. I wanted to be a journalist. I would read the works of the Free Press writers like uh, Bob Talbert and later Betty DeRamus, and
Yeah.
some of the writers, Miss Rita Griffin in the Michigan Chronicle.
Right.
I loved all of these local writers, and I wanted to be just like them. And so I was a teenage sort of writer, writing for myself, and writing leaflets and pamphlets and all this kind of thing for our student activities. And I was a student activist in the Black Student United Front, and I was associated through that with the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, who was a blue collar organization in the factories at that time.
Okay.
And so as an adult, over time, I began to write. I had a baby very young at 17, and I went to work in a factory and began to maybe write more union oriented things, for the work in the workplace. And
Right.
eventually I became a union president. Uh, and um, and that was with the Bakery Workers Union. And
Okay.
and the bakery workers represented the big industrial bakers, not
Okay.
mom and pop corner bakeries, but these are major, huge factories. They're
Right.
industrial. They're as industrial as the car plants. And that was like Wonder Bread, Tasty Bread, Hostess Cake, these places.
Yeah.
And Frito-Lay, which is where I worked. And I became president of those that labor union,
Hmm.
the Bakers Union. And I was the first Black person, the youngest, and the first woman
Hmm.
ever elected, to that organization. Um, this is in the early 80s. And
And you
so
never stopped writing. I mean,
no, but I was
you
always writing something.
yeah,
I was always writing stuff. I love to write, and I mostly love to read more than anything. And
right.
and it was almost like maybe the reading, I read so much that it was a need to download some of this stuff
Yeah.
was going on in my head, and I was such an observer, of things around me. And I think that had come from my father had begun to suffer from alcoholism
Mm.
from the time it began to be really notable after he was forced to move to 12th Street.
Okay.
And he became very ill with a physical illness. And then his drinking sort of really uh, catapulted.
Mm.
And so then we went from being children or a family in this, very successful record man home, and
Yeah.
filled with parties and, you know, my beautiful mother and her sisters, and they're all beautiful women and married to very cool guys. And then it began to make this shift into growing up in the real hellishness
Mm.
of active advanced alcoholism. And then our lives were completely different. And because
Okay.
he had become really after a time, after 67, when he lost his business in the rebellion, and he never could reopen. And I think at that point he became so despondent,
Yeah.
and drinking just
Gave
took
up.
over his life. He just gave up, and he
Yeah.
basically drank himself to death. And
Yeah.
he died in 1973.
Okay.
Um, but because of growing up at a young age with an alcoholic parent, I think it gave me a certain sense of observation,
Okay.
a gift of observation, of always watching my surroundings, always coming home from school wondering, okay, what's the lay of the land today? Because he was a raging, he would have to be committed from time to time because became very violent,
Mm.
and he was very ill. He was very sick. And so this sense of observing my environs and observing the people around me and their reactions to my father and my father's relationships with them, plus growing up in a family business,
Yeah.
can make any child. I don't care if it's a child today growing up working in a gas station, or kids working in bike shops or whatever. Kids working that grow up in retail businesses, like local retail businesses. I think you end up with a certain power of observation, watching people as they come in,
Sure.
enjoying people as they enjoy your product.
Yeah.
People would come in, from the street. I want that new record by the Temptations, and you
Right.
know, my brother and I made dance. We love dancing at the record shop. We supposed to be working hard, but we'd be dancing a lot, and doing the shingling and the boogaloo and all those dances that we used to do.
But
And
those observations
yes,
probably enhanced
yes,
your writing and
yes,
really helped kind of morph it into, more of maybe what you're doing today, do you think? Or
I think so, because I hear people often say that um, I write like a painter.
okay.
I write so that a person can visually experience
Yeah.
what I have observed,
Yeah.
my observations. I used to write fiction when I was young, but as
Yeah.
I got older, I had and have no desire to write fiction. I think that life is just amazing enough. I don't have to make up anything.
No,
Uh,
this is true.
yeah, just the ability to try to transmit things that I have seen or remembered, or try to accurately transmit what
Yeah.
others remember. Like I don't have many memories myself of growing up, of being in the Hastings Street store,
Okay.
because we were gone from there by the time I was about 6 years old. So
Okay.
I don't have a lot of memories of growing up there, of being there.
Right.
Uh, but I've had to rely in my writing on my older brother's memories, because
Mm.
he was almost an adult. He was a teenager and he worked side by side. My father's name was Jovan Battle. I didn't say that. And he had a record shop called Joe's Record Shop on
Right.
Hastings. And his son, my older half brother, is Joe Von Battle Jr. And at this writing, he is alive and well. He's 86 years old,
Great.
and has just remarkable stories
Yeah.
about growing up in the record shop.
Oh my God.
Well, he didn't grow up in the record shop. He was a teenager when my dad started the record shop. He was a young teen, and then he continued to work in the record shop until he became an adult and ended up having a family and going to work in one of the plants. But to be able to transmit his memories and his sister, my older half sister's memories, into this work, because my father died. He drank himself to death, and when he died, um, he died in obscurity.
Mm.
He was no longer a famous record man. He had long before, left that behind. He died in relative obscurity. We still lived in Highland Park in a family home. And
Right.
I'm sure my mother had a very difficult time trying to keep that roof over our heads because my dad was really sick. And my my goal was, when I started writing about my dad, was to restore his name to the public domain,
Right.
because I began to realize that even in the literal hell that we grew up in, I remembered my father when he was not like that. And I remember that sense of him being the great, mighty Jovan Battle on Hastings Street. I remember
Right.
that. And I wanted to capture that. And
Yeah.
also for his older siblings that, grew up with a dad, who was obviously a very big man in the environs in which he lived and worked.
I
And
think
so,
that's really important. I think that's really
yeah,
important. I mean, you really,
legacy.
yeah, you created that legacy. You didn't want to leave it at how he passed away, but
Exactly.
and I think that was probably around the time you and I met during Kresge. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that was sort of the story or the work that you were doing at the time. Is
Mhm.
that right?
That's right. I
Yeah.
wrote the first piece. What happened is that I began to write. For a long time, I was just working.
Yeah.
I went to work every day, and I may write a piece here and there. I had some friends in music writing, music criticism.
Hmm.
One is a man by the name of Dave Marsh. And Dave Marsh is a quintessential music critic and music writer. He's written scores of books on music, popular music, mostly rock and roll music.
Okay.
Uh, and he was originally from Detroit, and he lived in New York. And we meaning a group of music critics from around the country. I had begun to write a lot about music.
Yeah.
And I had spent some years in the rock and roll world as I
Okay.
became an adult. In my 20s, I became, due to the relationship I was in at the time with a man by the name of Frank Joyce, who was an on air personality, who became an on air personality at WABX.
Hmm.
Um, I became plunged into the rock and roll world.
Hmm.
Well, this wasn't a difficult morph because I had grown up in the music business.
Right. Exactly.
And, but it's just although my music that I mostly listened to was, R&B and black music and that,
Sure.
rock and roll, of course, its roots are there.
Right.
And so then I grew up in this world then in my 20s of being, I remember going to concerts of, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels and Sting and all kind of rock and roll, Bob Seger,
Yeah.
this became my world for some years.
Right.
And while I was in that particular relationship, and which produced my youngest child, Joe Battle Jr., he's named after my dad. And
Okay.
so this has been a journey, a musical journey of me writing about music. And so,
Yeah.
in connection with some of that, um, Frank Joyce's friend, Dave Marsh, they had been
Hmm.
long time friends. Uh, Dave began to encourage me to write,
Okay.
seriously write. He was like, you can write and you need to really write. And so he began to publish me in his early online journals that he had. He had
Right.
an online magazine called Rock and Roll Confidential, and then it was
Hmm.
called Rock and Rap Confidential as hip hop began to grow. And so he published a few things that I wrote there. So I was writing about music a lot.
Hmm.
But the way that I began to really write about music for real, about my dad, I was looking for a watch one day
Yeah.
and I'm online. And this is a new thing to buy something online.
Right.
This is like fraught with like, I'm going to pay these people money. I don't even know them. But I'm
Yeah.
looking for, a wristwatch. I don't think I had a dream of paying any more than $50. And
Right.
so I'm looking online. I'm on eBay, and one of the sellers, and I'm asking a question about the watch he's selling. He says, you seem to have a particular interest in these watches. Would you like to become a part of the online wristwatch community?
Huh.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. And it was like a movie, like a portal literally opened and a whole world. I was in a whole different world
How so?
because he introduced me to various websites where there
Okay.
were wristwatch and clock and watch enthusiasts.
Okay.
And this was a whole thing that I did not know existed. And I liked watches. And so I became interested in this, but these were major websites.
Hmm.
And this is all they talked about was just watches. And this was during the dot-com years. And
Right.
all of these young men, particularly men, they had so much money from all of this new tech startups and all of this new computer stuff and all of these, whatever the tech stuff was at the time,
Right.
and the early 2000s. And they were purchasing watches that were of, extraordinary costs.
Yep. They're
You know,
expensive.
yeah, I'm talking about tens of thousands of
Right.
dollars. You know,
Right.
I'm talking like people who, uh, these extremely wealthy
Yeah.
people that would talk about how they had just had a handmade watch and it was like 500,000, but it was a whole world of watch connoisseurs
Hmm.
from Timex to these type of extraordinary watches. And I
Okay.
just became involved in that world for years. I mean, I never could afford the watches, but I loved talking about watches and looking at watches. And what happened was that because we had become a real community,
Yeah.
would end up we would mess the watch threads up talking about other things. And so
Okay.
the various website heads decided, let's create off-topic boards to talk about other things. Okay.
Okay.
And so sometimes I would say, I'm in Detroit here, and I grew up in the record biz and I would say my dad was Joe Von Battle, and he made records. And to my utter shock, these websites, which had members from all over the world,
Hmm.
there would be so many of them that would know about my father.
Oh, no
This
kidding.
was just astonishing to me because
Wow.
I'm telling you, if I went anywhere in Detroit, they wouldn't know anything about him. There
Right.
were only a handful of people that I had run into.
But through the
I,
internet, you
these
saw a
people
whole
around
new
the
world.
world
Yeah, that's
that
amazing.
they were because they were such kind of uh, into the minutia of watches and all that. You know, collectors can
Sure.
be cross genres,
Yeah,
and many of them, some of them were also record collectors,
yeah,
and so they knew about Detroit music. They knew about this record label, Battle label, Vaughn label.
yeah,
Those were various names of my dad's record labels. They knew all about the music, but they
yeah.
didn't know anything about this person until I came along. And I was like, wow, isn't this? I was just astonished. It was people
Yeah.
in Japan, Australia, France, England, all over. And they were just hungry to know more about this. So
Okay.
then that's what started me to really write about my dad in the mid 2000s.
It's
And
amazing. I really
it
didn't know that.
is,
I did not know that about you, that you were you're
yeah.
literally one of the early influencers on the internet,
I, I,
basically.
I guess you would say that. No, I think about
Yeah,
it, but yes. And then they offered me because I was doing so much writing.
yeah,
Because to me, the internet, first of all, the computer changed my writing life.
sure.
Because my handwriting, I can't even read it if I,
Yeah,
and I came up in the years of the old typewriters,
sure. Yep.
and then I remember the step technologically to the word processor.
Right.
But even that was very awkward.
Yeah.
But when the computer came along, oh my God, you could just take whole paragraphs and just move them around. Just
It upped
you,
your game.
oh my goodness,
It helped up your game.
it changed the game totally.
But that's
And
so interesting that
yeah,
these sort of like online blogs or threads, if you will, kind
right.
of catapult you into going, geez, there's a whole new world out there that
Yes,
may or may not have known about your father.
yes,
In this instance, they did, and
yes.
gave you the idea what to do more with it.
Yes. And so that's what catapulted me to the next stage of my writing. And then one of the owners of the one of the watch websites called thepurist.com.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was for watch connoisseurs.
Mm-hmm.
He approached me, his name at that, I don't think he's associated with it now. I'm not sure. But his name was Thomas Mile, Dr. Thomas Mile, and on the West Coast.
Mm.
And he asked me, he was the owner of the site that he had originated. And he asked me if I would like to have my own, if I would like to have my own off-topic board, and a conversation board
Huh.
called Bellettes, French for beautiful letter, Bellette.
Okay.
And and so that is another vehicle that I could do some serious hunkered down writing.
Right.
And so that was it. And so that was probably mid 2000. And then in 2008, I published my blog for the first time. The name of it is Marsha Music. And I began to call myself that because I wrote a lot about music.
Right.
And I published the story of my dad. That
Yeah.
was my first blog. I published the
Right.
story of my dad. And in 2012, that is when, by that time, I had written a few other major pieces.
Hmm.
I had been asked to write an extended essay. Uh, I had written I was asked to write an extended essay on Lafayette Park
Mm-hmm.
because that's where I lived at the time. And that ended up being published in a book called Thanks for the View, Mr. Mees,
Okay.
Lafayette Park. And that was a real turning point. And also, I published a piece during that time called The Kidnapped Children of Detroit.
Hmm.
And that piece really uh, changed my trajectory in some ways because those pieces, I was really writing about my experience and my observations about the city and the changes in the city. And at that time, whites were beginning to move back into the city in earnest. And I wanted to capture the feeling of being a Black person to observe this over the years
Yeah.
in such a way, however, as to explain it objectively
Right.
and not with a lot of emotional vitriol. I wanted to talk about the cycle
Hmm.
of development, which is actually fueling the move out of the city and back into the city.
Right.
And during that time, we also had begun to, on Facebook had started, and we began to, coalesce on Facebook, many people, and we formed these various groups of Highland Park alumni.
Hmm.
And there were the Highland Park High School group and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And all of us Black Highland Parkers were gathered up on this group.
Yeah.
But gradually, some of our white friends
Hmm.
with whom we had grown up began to knock on the door and
Uh,
say, hey, we want to be in the group too. And so we welcomed all of these new ones in the group who had been far flung,
sure.
uh, and whites from all over. And they wanted to share in these memories and they were stunned when they came into these alumni groups and realized that we remembered all of them.
Yeah. Right.
They didn't necessarily remember us clearly, all of us,
Yeah.
but we remembered our own neighbors. And
That's
so,
great.
yeah, and it was really something, and it was very moving looking
Yeah.
back on it. And I remember particular people who I would not name, but I will say, there's Sarah and various ones who were very dear during this period. And they really inspired me. I said, this is a teachable moment. I knew
Mhm.
this was something very special. And that is when I wrote this piece called The Kidnapped Children of Detroit, because I decided that I was going to describe the baby boomers, such as myself,
Mhm.
who had been snatched away from the city, not of their own volition. And it was of their parents,
Mhm.
decisions, parental decisions to move out. And many of them moved out because we were there. And I say that those young people, they were not just moved out, but they were kidnapped from
Mhm.
us, from the city. And this is one reason why there's always discomfort around a certain sense of entitlement that
Mhm.
many whites have, particularly boomer age whites who
Right.
come into the city or talk about the city. But and it's regarded as racial and racist and things like that. But I also chose to look at it as an entitlement that was really a longing that had come from being taken from the city as children, not really knowing what was going on. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, mom and dad, they don't live here anymore, and they
Yeah.
have all these friends and they're uprooted. And as children do, they got used to living in their new suburban situation. And so I wrote this very extensive piece on that. And that was one of my Kresge submissions. Uh,
Okay.
and I can't remember if the Lafayette Park one was as well, but that
Yeah.
was those two were during my Kresge period, and I was very very shocked and gratified to have been granted a Kresge fellowship in the
Yeah.
literary arts in 2012 because I
And
had never applied for anything in my life like that.
yeah, and I can relate to that. And it changed probably your life. from that point on. I know it did for me. It changed a lot of what I was working on. I can listen to you forever because it's just always so interesting, and you never there there isn't you're never going to run out of stories. Like
Well, I'm a storyteller. I'm a
that's what's
storyteller.
yeah. But as we kind of wrap this up a little bit, Marsha, let's maybe talk about that post Kresge time, which was sort of the early, 2000s to now. What are you doing lately? What's your latest things that you're working on? Because I know you've changed even you've done different presentations, you've been asked to read different things, write different poetries, you've been part of I think some films as well, and you really are an ambassador to Detroit. I mean, there's no question about that. Let's just wrap up by talking about maybe some of the things that you're working on now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for those little prompts too, so I can remember what to say. Well, I have been after Kresge, that at the urging of producer Njia Kai,
Hmm.
who was working with Kresge at the time, she urged me to do a one-woman show.
Yep.
And so that began my life as a quote performer,
Right.
performing my own work and talking about this history, but figuring out how to do it in such a way that taught history as well.
Right.
And so I have one woman shows that I have done in many stages uh, in Detroit, across Detroit and downtown. In much more recent years, I was asked to read for the symphony in about 2015. There was um, a symphony written for Detroit called
Yeah.
Symphony in D, and by Todd Mackover, an MIT professor at that time. And he came to Detroit to write a symphony and use some of the people here in order to voice some of uh, the life in Detroit. And I was
Mhm.
chosen to be one of those. So I read my really kind of epic poem about Detroit with the symphony, with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. And then in 2020, I was very blessed to have had a role created for me as Erda, which is a
Mm.
historic role in the opera Twilight Gods.
Oh,
And
wow.
they fashioned that role
Yeah.
uh, so that I would be able to be the narrator for the opera Twilight Gods uh, by the Detroit Opera. And that was a really groundbreaking project because it was in the midst of the first year of the pandemic when people
Yep.
were not leaving, and so they created an opera that was that was played in the parking garage, in the parking,
Right.
the second floor parking structure,
Yep.
and in which cars came through, and on each floor they saw
Hmm.
another chapter of the opera being played out. And then they also saw me at one point on one of those floors, and I was the narrator of the entire project.
Yeah.
And they had my face as an avatar uh, in giant screens outside as when they first entered, as I began the narration. It was just an amazing thing.
I think it's
So
terrific.
I've been doing some wonderful things. I am another one. I can honestly say that the Kresge Fellowship changed my life. You
Yeah.
know, there is a financial prize, yes, but the widening,
Yeah.
of my, increase my territory,
Yeah.
as it's sometimes biblically said, you know, it was just an amazing thing, being a Kresge awardee.
Yeah. I
And
can identify with that. And
yeah,
like I said earlier when we first started chatting, I think it changed all of our lives in how we viewed
yeah,
art and viewed our own art. I mean, when you think about your life to this stage, starting from writing some music stuff to threads on websites to now, one woman show type of thing. It's fantastic. Not everybody can say that. And you are quite the fashion icon too. I mean, I don't have that. You've got, I've seen online the different outfits and whatnot, and you're always, you know,
Well,
on
I
your
thank
mark.
you. I
With
thank you. I love to dress. I have always loved to dress. And in recent years, I've just really indulged myself in it. And I realize that that's another calling. And I look at dressing as an art practice, really. It's another art
yes.
practice. I love to dress. And I was very blessed to come to the attention of the writer of the book, Advanced Style, which was
Mm,
really an internationally acclaimed book of by Ari Seth Cohen, who
okay.
began to photograph women that he encountered who were mature women and
Yeah.
who had style. And these women began to populate all kind of social media sites because these photos that he was taking all over
Right.
captured the imagination of many. And so he created an entire book of these photographs called Advanced Style. And then he created another second book called Advanced Love, in which there
Mm,
were couples. And that's how I became associated with the project because my now deceased husband,
mm,
the artist David Philpott, who was also a Kresge Fellow,
that's
he,
right.
a master artist, master carver
Yep.
uh, from Chicago, originally from Chicago. And he and I posed for Advanced Style for Advanced Love, his second book, Ari's
Right.
second book. And that has given me a certain profile,
Very good.
internationally as a style person. And
Yeah.
it's just a blessed life. I'm just very
Yeah.
blessed. I've had the opportunity to be in over a dozen literary anthologies. I've written a book, a small pocket book called the Detroitist, and I continue to contribute to my own blog, marshamusic.wordpress.com. That's my shameless plug.
Yeah, that's
And
all
I
right.
was and I was very blessed, I guess, in closing to say that um, this is now the beginning of 2024. And at the end of 2023, I was very blessed to receive at the end of the year both the City of Detroit's award, the Spirit of Detroit,
Hmm.
and the award of the governor, the state of
Yeah.
Michigan's a tribute from the state of Michigan.
Well
Uh,
deserved.
that was just unbelievable. And so I was very blessed to receive those acknowledgments of my work.
Well, I'll tell you what, Marsha, I am honored to be your friend. And I'm honored to know you all these years. Some of this that we talked about, I had no idea. So this was great talking to you. But what it also says is I know there's more, and I know that we could probably do this again. So I want you to keep doing what you're doing. Yep, exactly. You keep doing what you're doing, and congratulations on everything. And thanks for sharing some of these stories today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and keep an eye out. I'm finishing, hopefully this year, a movie project about the life and times of my father, and his
Wow.
record life and our life with him. And I'm writing a second book
Terrific.
about growing up.
Well,
Okay.
we'll keep an
All
eye on it. And if you need me as an extra in the background, thumbing through some records, I do that
right. Okay.
really well.
That's your area of expertise. That's
That
cool.
is my area of
Okay.
expertise.
That's all
All
right.
right. Thank
Okay.
you, Marsha.
Thank you so much, Ara.
Thank you for tuning in to Michigan Creates. For more information about our podcast series, I invite you to visit michigancreates.net.